Good morning, Beacon kids. Hope you're doing well this week. So this week we're going to learn about a character from the Bible you might not even have heard of. He's a very unusual character, and he's a guy called Ehud. Now, Ehud was born many years ago in the Old Testament. Now he's in the book of Judges, and unfortunately the book of Judges has a theme, and it's the people of Israel, and it was after they went into the promised land. Again and again they turn away from God and do things that are wrong. So in this particular story, Ehud, God uses him to basically do a job. And this is a really interesting story. So the first thing is, and I'm going to talk about this, and this is what we're going to talk about today, is Ehud actually had a disability. So he couldn't use his right hand, and he had to use his left hand. So he wasn't left-handed, which is, now if you're left-handed, some of you might be left-handed, some of you might be right-handed, depends which hand you write with, or what you might do sports with, or whatever you might do, you might pick your nose with. Whatever that hand is, that's the hand you predominantly use. I am right-handed, so I mostly use my right hand, but I use my left hand now and again for other, for some things. But mostly it's my right hand. So if I'm doing any writing, that's the hand I use. Now, Ehud couldn't use his right hand because he had a disability, so he had to use his left hand, but he wasn't left-handed. Now, have you ever tried to use your left hand to do anything? Well, I'm going to show you a little video now, which is, this is George and me and Ben, and we all had a go at writing with our left hands. And it's really tricky. It's really hard. If you look at it, it's, it just doesn't feel right. When you're writing with your right hand, it feels normal. It feels the way you're supposed to do it. But as soon as you start writing with your left hand, it feels really weird. And you know what? You might notice, apart from George, actually, he seems quite good at writing with his left hand. Me and Ben really struggle. Our handwriting gets much worse. We're a bit messy. I mean, not particularly tidy to start with. From my perspective, my handwriting is not tidy. But when you look at it now, you'll see that there could be. Now, what it says here in the story, it talks about Ehud. Now, he was left-handed because he had a disease or tissue, so he was seen as being weak because he had this disability that meant he couldn't do it. So this is really interesting because this is a guy who God decided to use, even though he had a disability. In fact, he used his disability as a strength. And this is something really good in the Bible. And this is I would say this is two things. It's one is to remember that people who have disabilities, you might have a disability of some description, might be something physical, it might be something that you struggle with learning, it could be something like dyslexia or anything like that. And actually, God can still use it. He still loves you and he still wants to use you for things. So let's find out, because this is one of my favourite stories in the Bible. So we're going to find out what happened with Ehud. So the story. So this is what happened. This is how God used Ehud. So again, the Israelites had done bad things in the eyes of God, and he wasn't very happy with them. So he let a man called Eglon, he was a king, and he took over Israel. Now, Eglon was not a nice king. He was very fat and very greedy and very cruel. And he took possession of Jericho, and the Israelites were subject to him being their king for 18 years. So the Israelites cried out and said, Lord, we want you to deliver us. And God decided to use Ehud to deliver them. And he was a man, as I said, he couldn't use his right hand. But this gave him a special ability, you see. Now, because in those days, they used to have their swords on their left side. So you'd have your sword here, because I think you're right-handed, and if you were to pull the sword out, you could pull it from its scabbard to use it to fight with. So everyone always looked on your left side to see if you had a sword. So Ehud turned up to visit the king. He turned up with a gift, and the king was very greedy. So Ehud was allowed to go in to see the king. They checked, looked on his right side, saw he had nothing there of any danger, and then they let him go in to see the king. When he went in to see the king was very excited because, of course, he was going to get something nice. That's something that he always liked, getting things. And he ushered people out, and he stood there just with Ehud. And that Ehud surprised him because he pulled out, using his left hand, a sword that he'd had hidden on his right side. So he pulled it out and he stabbed him deep in his fat belly. And his sword wasn't a very long sword. It got swallowed up because the king was so fat, it went right into his belly and he couldn't get his sword back. He stepped back and unfortunately he stabbed him into his tummy, and all his guts, the smell was all the smell of everything that was in his stomach was very smelly and disgusting. So when his servants heard a bit of a noise and they got a little bit concerned, they came to the door and they could smell this disgusting smell. So they made the decision. They said there and then, oh, he's obviously having a poo, so we're not going to go in and disturb him. And because of that, it gave Ehud an opportunity to escape, and he escaped out. Isn't that an amazing story? It's not the sort of story we expect in the Bible, but I think it's quite an amazing one for two reasons. One, because can you imagine he was so big the sword disappeared into his belly, and also that it was so smelly that they thought he was having a poo. Well, that's quite a thing. But the most amazing thing here is Ehud. Now, this is a guy, and God used him. Even though he had this disability, God was able to use him. Now, I'm going to say to you now, God's probably not going to encourage you to want to kill somebody, so don't go out there. But he can use you to do good things that he wants to do, things that he can do. Whatever you may think, you might think, I'm not clever enough, or I'm not strong enough, or for whatever reason you say, I can't be used by God. And actually, that's not true. The truth is, God can use you for absolutely anything, and he will use your weaknesses and turn them into his strength. Because actually, like we learned when I talked to you on the Zoom session a little while back, we talked about Gideon, and he shrunk Gideon's army down and made it really little. And there's all those times God uses people in the Bible. Quite often he makes it so that he uses their weakness, because then it can only be God, so that people have to believe that it was God that came through and not just the person. So I just really want to encourage you this morning, if you're feeling, oh, I can't do things, well, actually, you can pray to God. You can trust in him. You can put your faith in him, and he will be with you. And do you know what? He's got a plan for you, and he wants to use you. So we're going to finish with a bit of music now, but I hope you've had a lovely morning. Take care.
You're everywhere, and you're right here with me. So glorious. I won't stop singing. I'll keep singing. You're glorious. You're everywhere, and you're right here with me. So glorious. I won't stop singing. I'll keep singing.
Ready? Right, boys, ready? Okay, remember it. Ready? So, is it?
I've got a maker, I've got a savior, I've got a father, he's the God of it all. I've got a maker, I've got a savior, I've got a father, he's the God of it all. I've got a maker, I've got a savior, I've got a father, he's the God of it all. I've got a maker, I've got a savior,